Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what is making the headlines with Ian Dunt, columnist at the Eye, and Katy, deputy political editor at the Spectator. Great to see both of you. So, to the front pages then, let us start with the Metro, which has an image of Prince Charles with the play on words, wish you were here, or ER. The Sun front cover has a similar with I hope I did you proud, mummy. The Guardian also has a picture of the Prince of Wales with the headline, Tories bereft of ideas to tackle the cost of living crisis. While the Eye reports on the Prime Minister making a U-turn on the cost of living crisis. The Daily Express has the same story, saying Boris Johnson promises firepower to help hard-hit families. The Daily Mail references the Queen's speech and the new law to make work from home easier, axed from the Queen's speech. The Times picks up on the proposal to allow councils to tax the profits of developers. The Daily Telegraph reports that Liz Truss is standing firm in the face of an EU trade war threat. And the Financial Times reports that Elon Musk has pledged to reverse Twitter's morally wrong ban on Trump. Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out those front pages while you watch us. So let's return then to our guests, Ian Dunt and Katy, who are here with us. And we kick off, obviously, with the Queen's speech and the criticism, Ian, of the government over what is or is not in it on the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, of the fact that there's nothing in the Queen's speech. I mean, it's been, 6 weeks since we had the spring statement from Rishi Sunak. Comes out, basically offers absolutely nothing to people who are struggling. For some inexplicable reason, the government has spent the last 6 weeks doing absolutely nothing about that situation while getting pounded electorally for their failure to do so. They come out with a set of bills today. I mean, there's just nothing there. It's like an election leaflet masquerading as a government. They have no plans really of any sort of meaty, substantial thoughts for any subject other than the fact that they want to further imprison protesters, another effort from Priti Patel in the Home Office. When it comes to actually improving people's lives, it is just an utter black hole. The only detail of which was Boris Johnson saying, oh, maybe in a few days I'll come up with something, which the Treasury later very quickly said, well, actually, probably he won't.
Do you agree, Katy? The Prime Minister did say, obviously, they need to be responsible with cash. The idea, of course, is to eventually cut taxes ahead of a general election. The hint from Rishi Sunak that the help might come in the autumn. So where do you see the cost of living crisis sitting in the legislative programme in the parliamentary term ahead?
Well, I think the issue, and this is why, in a way, the decision to lead the Queen's speech by saying that the cost of living crisis was obviously the government's priority, as was growing their economy. That's all very well, but it didn't really correlate to the contents of the Queen's speech. And that is down to a few reasons. But one of them is lots of the really big issues facing the economy. You're not going to answer with legislation. And instead, you're looking for, whether there's going to be an early budget, something which, an emergency budget, something which the Treasury have ruled out. We'll be looking more to measures like that. The most we got was the words saying that the government was going to work closely with the Bank of England to try and bring down inflation. Now, that would imply that actually the government does not plan to spend much or throw more funds at this particularly, because we know that ministers are concerned about actually making the issue of inflation worse, leading to stagflation. I think, therefore, though, by putting this focus on it today, when really, if you look at the bills in the Queen's speech, there are more on things like security, policing, Channel 4, much wider. It has just led to a situation where everyone said, well, you've just said it's about cost of living. What have you got to show for that? And then, as has just been touched on, there was the confusion when Boris Johnson appeared to say something will be, more will be said in a few days. And actually not just the Treasury, but it feels as though figures in Downing Street too, there was a general sense that, oh no, don't overread this. So it was a strange state of affairs. But I think the fact the Prime Minister felt the need to say that does suggest he is feeling the pressure.
Yes, the Daily Express quoting that fiscal firepower would be used to help the hard-hit families. But Boris Johnson did say that the legislative programme would build the foundations for decades of prosperity. But that's years ahead, isn't it? It's the short-term issues right now that people really need. That's the Daily Express. Meanwhile, Ian, the Daily Mail, focusing on working from home. A new law to make working from home easier was axed from the Queen's speech. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, it's the employment bill. It's not just that, also it would have created a watchdog to fight for workers' rights, sort of a product of the Conservative Party at a rather different ideological stage. Not very long ago, just months ago, sort of after the election, when it was suddenly, thinking about the Red Wall, thinking, right, we'll fight for workers, we're a much more kind of, stealing Labour's clothes. Not really like the Thatcherite party that it seems to be much more comfortable posturing as at the moment. So yes, that is lost. We haven't got any sign of that bill. Yes, working from home seems to be in the spotlight. And the sort of Jacob Rees-Mogg's attack on the civil service are an indication of that. There's no sign whatsoever that there's been any thought as to why this might be the case, except for just a sort of instinctive knee-jerk prejudice against change. People had found during the pandemic, an atrocious few years. One of the only good things that came out of it for, yes, lucky office workers, for white-collar workers, was that they found more of a balance in their working life. And yet they could be in sometimes and they could be in the office sometimes. And maybe things would work out in a more satisfying way in terms of the whole of your life, taken as a whole. That, of course, is now something that the government seems keen to dismantle or at least fail to support. They're completely unable to express any economic or moral or social reasons for why that might be the case.
Yeah, it reminds us of the Lord Sugar versus PwC battle. PwC, who've given their staff Friday afternoons off during the summer months, and that was roundly criticised by Lord Sugar. And people say that's a part of the culture war of the future of employment, do they not? In the meantime, The Sun has that slightly mournful-looking photograph there of Prince Charles. It's elsewhere in the papers as well. One paper describing that he was looking over to the crown of his missing mother, effectively. But I hope I did you proud, Mummy. The main news of today was the absence of Her Majesty the Queen, and really many people feeling that we'll never see her do this occasion again, Katy.
Yes, and I think, as you say, and as the paper notes there, The Sun has Prince Charles looked emotional yesterday as he stepped in for his mother, obviously at the state opening of Parliament. And I think that while we all expect at some point to see Prince Charles taking on these roles, it clearly is tinged with sadness in the sense that it suggests that all is not well with the Queen. I think that the palace is very keen to insist not to overread into this, saying that she watched it from home. I think the question is the Queen going to be able to take part in all the Queen Jubilee celebrations that are being planned? I think if it is obviously giving someone rest, given their age, so they can do that, then I think everyone will be pleased that is made possible. But it obviously does add to general concerns.
And the Matt cartoon, Ian, perhaps you could talk us through that. It looks like a footman with a crown. And state crown delivery notes: if the monarch is not in Parliament, leave in porch, try neighbours, leave by throne. And that is indeed what happened.
Yeah, we've got this extraordinary sight of the sort of special crown car, which it sort of went off in towards the end. It's not something that I'd ever seen before, and was, of course, pretty much on course for the sort of absurdity of Britain's pomp ceremonial life. It does feel a bit like we're getting prepped. There may be medical reasons for it too, but it does feel a bit like we're getting prepped for the idea of Charles as king, which, is going to happen, and probably is going to happen quite soon. And it's not such a bad thing as it is. The British people have a sort of aversion to Charles, where it's quite fashionable to dislike him. There's nothing there to dislike at all. He's sort of generally sensible and will be able to hold it relatively well. And I think that this initial sort of surprise and getting used to it, something that we're going to have to go through at some point, and it might as well be now.
Yes, and the appearance too of Prince William, many people suggesting this is a reminder that the monarchy is not an individual, it is an institution, and that helped reinforce that, certainly. Well, plenty more coming up next. We will have the latest on the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss standing firm, we are told, in the face of an EU trade war threat. That on the front of the Telegraph, discussing that in just a moment. Watching the press preview with me once again, Ian Dunt, columnist at the Eye, and Katy Balls, deputy political editor at the Spectator. To the Telegraph we go now, Katy, and what to do about that border in the Irish Sea. Liz Truss, we're told, is standing firm with the prospect of an EU trade war. What happens next?
Yes, and this is interesting because there was not a specific protocol built in the Queen's speech, but there was a reference to the arrangements of Belfast Agreement protecting it. And behind the scenes, there is a situation where Liz Truss, the government, could bring forward legislation on this. What this story is talking about is unilaterally changing the Northern Ireland Protocol. So that is not technically triggering Article 16, which is the way by which you suspend it. This is about actually just changing bits to it and then seeing what the EU does in response. And I think it doesn't take a great mind reader to predict that the EU would not be particularly happy. So the question is, how far does the Foreign Secretary want to go? Does she have the backing of the Prime Minister and the rest of the Cabinet? And if so, what would the response of the EU be? I think there is some division in Cabinet because you have figures such as Michael Gove, also Rishi Sunak, who have been concerned about going for something quite robust in terms of unilaterally acting on the protocol, if that is going to lead to the EU retaliating, potentially ripping up the trade deal completely, and before you know it, ending up in a trade war between the UK and the EU. Now, this is potentially the worst case scenario, but it's possible. And if you had that at a time where there's a cost of living crisis, you can imagine how much worse and how sensitive actually the economy would be to this. I think that the counter argument and what you'll hear from those pushing for changes is they spent so long trying to get changes to this agreement, something the UK did agree to initially, that they're getting exasperated with the EU. But I think what the story is saying is going to be one last attempt between the UK and EU to see if they can find some common ground. Judging it by previous attempts, I wouldn't get anyone's hopes up.
Yes, I mean, no, this is your specialist area, of course, Ian, is it not? The point, I suppose, is, will the EU be softened at all that this does appear now to be holding back the political process in Northern Ireland? Will that make any difference at all, or is this just a point of principle almost for both sides now?
Well, I just don't get that. I mean, the EU already made concessions. They made extensive concessions last year, really big ones. At the time, everyone was really quite surprised that they would go that far. Getting rid of loads of checks for goods, really big concessions on agriculture or on medicines. Apparently, everyone's forgotten that this ever took place. It certainly made no difference to the belligerence of the British government, which, you know, if you feel like you're experiencing Groundhog Day, it's because basically you are, because every 2 weeks there has to be a story about how the British government's going to detonate the protocol or trigger Article 16 or something or other. I mean, it's not as if they haven't made efforts to help the UK soften the deal that it itself proposed and then signed and now wants to detonate. It's a completely insane state of affairs. So I wouldn't blame the EU for thinking that they're negotiating with a mad dog. How Britain thinks that like now would be the time to do it, to put itself not just into a pitched battle with the EU, but into a pitched battle with Washington as well, which has made very clear the way that it will feel if we just start unilaterally ripping up national agreements we've come to is another matter.
We're running out of time. What a shame. Ian Dunt, Katy Balls, lovely to see you both. Thank you both very much indeed.